Our guest today is Ravi Kumar, president of Infosys, and we are speaking with him about how the emerging world of technology will shape the jobs of the future. Ravi, thank you so much for speaking with Knowledge at Wharton
Thanks,
today.
Mukul, for the opportunity.
So I want to start by talking about a recent panel at the Milken conference where you were a participant. And one of the things that you said on that panel is that 75 million old jobs will go away by 2022, and 135 million new jobs will be created because of new technologies. So the two questions I have are, how will the jobs of the future be different than the jobs that are being eliminated? And what are the main factors that are driving this change?
Thank you so much, Mukul. That's a great question, actually. In fact, every large enterprise and every large government ecosystem is thinking about this fact about automation, AI, machine learning, and new age digital technologies taking away jobs of the past and creating jobs of the future. That's happened in most tech revolutions in the past, but this to me is one of the biggest, and it's a tectonic shift in the way businesses and operating models have evolved in the last few years. I would think there will be fundamentally two big shifts. The first being a lot of repetitive tasks are going to be automated with machines and AI software in your workspace. So when that happens, the cognitive, non-repetitive tasks will be done by humans. So that's one big shift. So humans have to start looking at it as a way to amplify their jobs, using machines to amplify their jobs. And the shift from repetitive to non-repetitive tasks, so that's a big shift. The second, I would say, and this is one of my favorites, institutions, enterprises will move from a people workplace to a people plus machine workplace. And if I extend the thought, they will move from people plus gig plus machines. Machines will do the problem solving, the gig economy, which will give you variability of your workforce, agility of your workforce, and scale, and the private human capital you have, as I call it. I kind of make this distinction of public and private human capital will switch to creative jobs or problem finding. So repetitive tasks to non-repetitive, and the second is moving from problem solving to problem finding or more creative jobs. So humans will then, switch to transition to creative jobs. So these are the two big shifts in the way work packets in workplaces would be.
Sure. So I'd like to drill a little deeper into this issue, but before we do that, what are some of the opportunities and some of the challenges in implementing this vision that you just described?
The fundamental shift on this is lifelong learning. All of us have moved from, at least when I grew up, we had a linear equation of studies to work. And I call that linear straight line. And we're going to move to a continuum of lifelong learning, which essentially means you have to be a lifelong learner and you have to learn and learn to unlearn and learn to learn. That switch is a big switch for individuals to have a culture of being on that learning curve for all their lives. So that's a big switch in the way you see things. The second aspect is, and we kind of discussed in one of our previous conversations, which is about curiosity or problem finding. Lines between industries have blurred. As lines between industries have blurred, you have to start thinking in a much cross-functional way. There isn't a discipline or a disciplinary approach to work anymore. And that will make disciplines beyond core engineering and STEM, which was used for core technologies, to diverse into a much cognitive diverse pool. And I think in the digital age, applying technologies to businesses will be a much bigger virtue than the technology itself. So on one side of the spectrum, you need deep programmers. On the other side of the spectrum, you need individuals who can contextualize it to businesses and apply it, which means they need to be people who can actually find problems, people who can actually apply to businesses. So you need a much diverse workforce coming from liberal arts, coming from design, coming from humanity, coming from anthropology and disciplines of that kind. That's a big shift from the previous era where the tech revolution kind of got embraced with technologists. And technologists actually created the divide. Yeah. And this is an opportunity to actually bridge that divide.
It's interesting. I mean, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, I mean, given your role at Infosys, you probably see a lot of different companies in different industries across the world. Based on your perspective, which industries do you think are best prepared for this shift, and which countries are best prepared for these changes in the future of jobs?
So Mukul, that's a very intriguing question, I would say. Industries which had a legacy of adoption of core technologies or traditional technologies counterintuitively have a much difficult task of repurposing themselves because they have a legacy to deal with. So that's one aspect of reflecting which industry will play a role, which essentially means you could leapfrog multiple eras if you're an industry which did not adapt to traditional technologies and be ahead of the curve. You have that opportunity now if you have not done it in the previous era. The second way of seeing this is industry lines are blurring. Yeah. Every time I meet a CXO of a enterprise, they're not worried about the peers. Yeah. They're worried about what other industries are doing because they don't know who their competition is. Yeah. If I meet a bank, a CXO of a bank, most times I get to hear, tell us what you're doing with retail clients. Right. We want to know about them. And the same with all other industries. So industry lines are blurring. So you really don't know where to actually, how to measure, what you want to benchmark yourself with. Right. So that's one other aspect of seeing this. If I go back to societies or countries, countries in the Asia Pacific, the emerging ones like India, China, which did not have legacy systems and legacy processes to deal with, are leapfrogging and creating digital platforms which are significantly superior to some of the developed nations. And that's because the developed nations have to deal with a legacy. And when they have to deal with a legacy, they have to repurpose financial capital to fund the new, and they have to repurpose human capital to fund the new. While the emerging economies have this, if they have the vision, they have the opportunity to leapfrog into a completely new digital paradigm without even bothering what the legacy is all about. So I kind of have, and that's why I said it's very intriguing, who is going to win the race. Yeah. If I look at China, which traditionally did labor arbitrage to create a massive manufacturing ecosystem, today is in an inflection point at a crossroads where automation can take away that leverage of labor arbitrage, because the percentage of labor in a manufacturing shop floor is going down, and it could reshore manufacturing back to the developed nations. Right. If they don't embrace automation in a big way. Right. So I would think this is a very complicated paradox of sorts for economies to deal with it.
Right. No, I think that what you're saying is fascinating, because if you take a country like China, do you see this model that you described earlier of people plus machines plus gig? Do you see that playing out in China, and how is it different from the way it plays out, say, in a place like the US?
So it does. In fact, I actually think if you look at density of robots on a shop floor, China doesn't rank number one. Korea ranks much higher than them. Taiwan ranks higher than them.
So this is for the manufacturing.
This is the manufacturing space. Germany is doing pretty well. In fact, a lot of manufacturing is getting reshored back. So China really has to scale up on it, and they have to cannibalize their own selves. to get there. And that's the point I was making earlier. Being an incumbent is not necessarily a competitive advantage in an era where you can leapfrog and create necessarily a completely different operating model.
Right. No, I think that's true. Uh, uh, Moving slightly away from manufacturing into a service sector, say like banking and insurance, uh, as you look to the future of work in a sector like banking and financial services, what kind of jobs do you think are likely to go away, and what kind of new jobs will come into being as a result of these technology shifts that are going on?
Yeah, going to a bank to do a transaction, the traditional way of doing it is going to switch to the bank coming to your home and the bank coming to your app. And that's happened in literally in every country in the world. And in fact, in the emerging markets, the amount of transactions you can do online and do in a digital way, and the digital bank is much superior to doing it. If you go to developed nations, because they've just leapfrogged multiple eras to get there. So that's taken the whole banking revolution into a very different paradigm. If you go to underdeveloped nations, the unbanked, which is a significant population in underdeveloped nations, are getting access to a bank through the mobile phone. All of Africa does banking on mobile phone, and mobile service providers are becoming banks for those citizens. So banking has taken a very different paradigm in underdeveloped nations, where you can literally bank. You can bank the unbanked by a very different industry paradigm. And the lines between these industries are blurring, because everybody has a chance to be a bank of the future for those nations.
So how will jobs of the future need to balance between technical skills on the one hand and emotional and social skills on the other hand? And also, what are some of the implications for blue collar and white collar work that you see coming down the road?
That's a fascinating question, Mukul. As much as technologies of the future are going to change the paradigm of workforces and workplaces as well, on one side, you need deep programming skills to build these technologies. I think the bigger virtue is to apply these technologies to businesses, apply these technologies to our personal lives and our professional lives and the societies we live in. And that embrace will need an emotional quotient, an empathy quotient, to make technology live our lives better. Finally, that's what technology is all about. It has to make lives better. And for that to happen, my sense is we're going to move not just having deep programming skills with STEM talent, but we're going to have an inclusion of liberal arts, an inclusion of design, an inclusion of humanities, inclusion of disciplines which are completely away from the STEM, the STEM equivalent, if I may. And that never happened in the tech space when the tech revolution happened. It is going to happen in the digital age, when these technologies are going to be embraced across industries, and it will give you the emotional and the human aspect of technology. So I think liberal arts, design, and disciplines of this kind will play a much bigger virtue. I also believe that we're going to move from T skills to Z skills, and this is my way of articulating it. T skills are the skills where you specialize in an area, but you kind of have a broad embrace on things around you, and that's how educational ecosystems are built. We're going to move to Z skills, which means you learn, unlearn, and learn on a constant basis. And there isn't a discipline, so I almost call it anti-disciplinary approach to education. So you're spot on. The technology is important, but a bigger virtue is to apply them in a human, in an empathetic way to businesses. So that's the future.
Right. As you think about the future of work, and I know you think a lot about it, what are some of the biggest risks that keep you up at night?
Yeah.
And what do you hear from the people you talk to in different companies and different industries? What are they most worried about? What can be done about those risks so that everyone can sleep better at night?
Yeah, I think this is a follow-up question, but you teed it up before by asking the blue collar and white collar. It's kind of in the same space zone. Across the world, everybody now recognizes reskilling is very important.
Yeah.
Repurposing talent is very important. But everybody is talking about reskilling white collar jobs. What happens to blue collar jobs? What happens to a factory worker? What happens to a technician? What happens to a bartender? There was this distinctive difference between blue and white collar jobs and how you skill and reskill in the past. But the embrace of digital is so overarching and so pervasive that we need to start thinking about blue collar jobs. And I think that line will blur and you're going to have new collar jobs. Very little infrastructure has been established for blue collar jobs or jobs of the future. So that's a big risk, I believe, and that's an uphill task because they're not ready to get rescaled, and you are almost pushing them to reskill. In fact, our own initiative on community colleges is a phenomenal example of how we're trying to do that. Right. The second aspect, Mukul, I don't know whether you've thought about it, for this reskilling task, which is such a big mission, governments, academic institutions, and enterprises have to come together. Yeah. To take the onus. Who owns it? Is it the employee or the enterprise or the government or the academic institutions? Who owns it? But governments are wired in a very different way. Governments are wired for the first 15 to 20 years of their citizens' lives, and they're wired for the last 20 years of citizens' lives. But all the change happens in the middle. Right. And all the reskilling is needed in the middle. And how do governments re-architect their own infrastructure to deal with the middle? I think is a big risk we all foresee. And how do the educational ecosystems gear up to create lifelong learners? Right. I think these are the three things I would say I would lose sleep on.
And how is Infosys, what is Infosys doing to try to mitigate some of these risks?
In our own small way, we are making impact on all these three areas. We have a learning platform called Wingspan, which is a platform for enterprises to create learning for their employees. This is our own customers, not just our employees. And that is to create an embrace of learning across the enterprise, including blue-collar jobs. In the aspect around working with governments, we are very actively pursuing with governments. In fact, what we are hiring from schools in the US with our 6 centers is a partnership with local state governments and academic institutions to create future talent which doesn't exist in the market. Right. And to create lifelong learners, we have the Infosys Foundation in the United States, which is in the top 3 foundations for computer science education in K-12 schools. And our endeavor is to teach teachers so that they're equipped enough to teach students and teach students. And we're doing this at massive scale. I think that's in a small way our contribution to this, I would say, challenges and opportunities of the future.
Let me end with one last question. Let's imagine that among the people who are listening to this conversation, there are some young people who are just about to graduate from college and enter the workforce for the first time. What advice would you give them about things that they can do today so that they can have a meaningful career over the next 30 to 40 years?
That's a phenomenal question. I actually think being a lifelong learner is probably the most important aspect of this. And because academic institutions, the way they're wired, you finish higher studies, you get to work, and you think you're done with learning. I think you need to get back into the mind frame of being a lifelong learner, which essentially means what you learn today will get obsolete in literally in a few months or less than a year, and you should be prepared to challenge the status quo and create your own your own career path around it. And that, I think, is the only way you could be on this constant learning journey. I would say that's the era we are all entering into. And if they want to stay relevant, they have to be paranoid about the change around them and accordingly react.
Andy Grove, former CEO of Intel, used to say, "Only the paranoid survive." That might be a good mindset, for the future.
Absolutely.
Ravi, thank you so much for speaking with Knowledge at Wharton.
Thank you, Mukul, for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
For more insight from Knowledge at Wharton, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu.